Hey everybody, it's Duckville here. We've got something a bit different today. I wanted to have a little bit of a strategy talk. I've got my Protoss shirt on today because we are going to have just a short, well, hopefully a short talk. You guys know I do like to rant quite a lot, so this is going to be a little bit of a talk about dealing with Mech in particular. As you can see down there, we're duck on dealing with Mech is my inventive name for this particular little VOD. A lot of people will just say, oh, just make immortals and then you're done. Not exactly. That's not exactly how you do it. And, I watch a lot of replays and I see a lot of how a lot of Protoss players go about it. Generally, if you're above Masters, you should be okay. Most players are cool with dealing with Mech properly at that level. This particular video is going to be aimed a little bit more at sort of anyone below that range, and particularly people who like a lot of the time when you first see Mech, you sort of say, you say that same thing because it's the same thing that gets repeated all the time is, oh, just make immortals and then it's all good. And people do that and then they lose and then they're like, oh my god, what the hell just happened? What we're going to do is we're going to go over some, I'm going to try and make this as structured as possible, but again, I do like to rant and go on different tangents every now and then. We're going to talk about the basics of how Mech works, and then the principles that you can adhere to make sure that you do actually deal with it properly. Because, as I was saying, people sometimes get this tunnel vision when it comes to dealing with Mech. They simply throw away units that you really shouldn't be doing. They build units that are particularly bad in this particular matchup with dealing with this strategy. And also, when it gets to late game, it actually does get relatively annoying, and in some cases, if the Terran player is really good, difficult to deal with Mech. And as a random player myself who likes the Mech, and also has played a fair few games of Protoss versus Mech as well, it's something it's a little bit like all the Brood War players may remember a strategy called the Stove, where the tagline for the Stove, you can search for this on Team Liquid, it's called literally the Stove, search for it, it's actually a really funny strategy. The tagline for it was, what was it? It was something about, on the battlefield, a gun will almost always beat a sword, but that one time, you will get your head cut off. And it's the same thing. If you underestimate, you misplay dealing with Mech, you can run into a lot of trouble. So we're going to talk about some of the basic, the fundamentals of playing Mech in versus Protoss, know thy enemy, and also going over those principles shortly after. And we'll have a look at a couple of things just in game and a couple of replays that I have been sent by my good Mech buddy Zazinski, who, of course, as many people know, does that really slow, methodical turtle Mech style, which does lead him to quite some interesting late game situations versus Protoss. So we'll have a look at how to deal with that. Again, please do bear in mind, for those of you who are all knowing and almighty awesome at Protoss and are fine with dealing with Mech, that's cool. You can head on to one of the other videos. That's cool. But for the people who haven't really played it or don't know exactly how to deal with it, and every 1 in 50 games that it comes out, they don't know how to deal with it and they struggle, that's cool. Stick around and we'll look at these kinds of things. So first things first, of course, what we want to do is we want to talk about how Mech works, how the sort of principles and why it works the way it does, how the step-by-step sort of situation for getting to the proper Mech sort of things work and all that kind of stuff. So let's just first illustrate that Mech actually has it can be very diverse in the way that it is played. It sounds really weird, but it actually can. You've got players out there who do play Mech who have extremely different styles. People like HDO Mario, you can find him over on his stream there. You'll see him using Widow Mines quite a lot. And even late game uses quite a lot of Widow Mines. And to me, that's actually really impressive because I think that's really cool. Actually, come to think of it, I haven't seen him after the Widow Mine nerf, but from what I remember of seeing him a little while ago, he likes to use Widow Mines a lot and uses that as a core part of his composition. For people like Dzerzhinsky, uses a very slow, very methodical, very turtly kind of style. Sits behind a no-go zone where your tanks are going to be defending everything. Hellbats are there to hold back zealots and that kind of stuff as well. And it's just very slow and methodical. He won't necessarily push out and attack a huge amount, but he does it every now and then. Then you have a different style relating to, you know, building more Thors, going for a much heavier Thor-based composition, because Thors now with their high-impact payload mode can actually do quite well against air, Protoss air, and you know, you can have some fun with that. Then you get people like, I think, God, who am I thinking of? Oh, Strelok, use a lot of tanks. Goody uses a lot of Hellions. All these kinds of things do change every now and then, and it's not necessarily a massive kind of shift in the way that Mech is played, but it's tiny little things. And as a Protoss player, you need to be ready to adjust to those kind of things as well. But the core step-by-step kind of situation, I keep saying situation, the core strategy, sorry, with Mech generally remains the same. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at that. So the basic blueprint for Mech generally revolves around these particular steps. At the start of the game, you look to do a little bit of harass. Some players do that very extensively. Goody, if you have a look at some of his replays, loves to get out there with huge amounts of Hellions and Hellbat drops, Hellion drops, all these kinds of things. I've seen quite in a few of his replays. He does like to do that, and that's one of his preferred favorites. Other players will go for Widowmine drops. With Dzerzhinsky, we'll drop out Widowmines, normally 4 Widowmines right at the start, drop them in the mineral line, just harass, get a few probe kills, not necessarily destroy a mineral line, but get some damage done, and just sort of remove some of that early game threat that comes about when a Protoss goes for their normal 1-gate expand, picks up a nice probe count, and then can threaten through the mid game before third bases are taken. So a lot of Terran players will want to try and do that. They'll want to try and make the Protoss slow down. Normally, with Protoss, you get to a point where two base hits, and you peak at this little spot right there, and then you say, let's do this. We're going to attack. We're going to go, you know, 6 gates, Immortals, and stuff like that, or whatever the strategy may be, and then they'll peak at that point and say, let's do this. Other times, you'll peak at that point, you'll have enough defensive forces to hold back any kind of push, and then you go up to a third base and you peak even higher. So that's, as a Mech player, because all of your units are so slow, because they cost so much, you want to make sure that the peak is hit at a much later time, so that it doesn't necessarily come when, you know, you've got like 4 tanks and a couple of Hellbats or something like that, because when that kind of stuff happens, you're in a lot of trouble. So you need to be prepared for that kind of stuff. Step number 2 is to secure a third base. Terran players always will want to grab a third base. Mech costs a lot of gas. Thors cost 200. Tanks cost, what is it, 125 or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a thing where you remember a game. I'm sure you all know what I mean. And it's, once you have that third base, it gets much easier to get the production rolling. Normally a Terran player will sit on about 4 or 5 factories. Sometimes players will adjust things slightly to get a second starport out if they see their opponent going for Colossus, or to start Raven production really early. But normally the third base is when you start to feel really comfortable on Mech. As long as you've got a nice defensive setup, that's when you start to feel comfortable. When you get a fourth base, that's when things start to really crank up in the gear, and you start getting Ravens, you start looking towards even Battlecruiser tech, Ghosts start coming out in large numbers, and that's where, you know, that's where things really start to kick off when a Terran has 4 bases. Step number 3, build up the core units. Same sort of thing that I was talking about before. Thors, tanks, Widowmines, sometimes. I don't think the Widowmine thing is as common, but it does happen every now and then. What else have you got? Oh yeah, Ravens are extremely, really core sort of thing. You start to build these up once you're on 3 bases, heading to 4, grabbing a 4th, then you start to build up these core units. Number 4, Ghost busting. if a Terran player identifies, normally there'll be scans when you know the Protoss has a third base. That's when you have to be very good with your scans or any type of scouting as a Terran player to identify what is my Protoss opponent going for. Are they going straight air? Okay, we need some extra starports to start Viking production, get the Ravens out, or Thors. You know, this kind of mix. This is what I'm talking about, the diversity of it. It's really interesting. Have they gone for a double robo? Okay, we need to start getting the ghosts out. Have they gone for Templar? Alright, we need to start getting the ghosts out, because Archons will wreck everything if you're not prepared for them. So ghosts are a really big key in playing Mech, because a lot of the time, if I remember correctly, Strelok and Goody sometimes play this weird kind of no ghost thing, and if memory serves me right, a long time ago when Liquid C was playing, when good old C from the Brood War days was playing Mech, he would just like completely forget about ghosts, and it was really weird. But ghosts, if you want to truly, I guess, progress with mid and even into the late game of a Mech play versus a Protoss, you will need to have ghosts. Archons need to be EMP down, otherwise they sort of just start wrecking everything. Immortals, of course, will get blasted apart by tanks as long as their shields are gone. Then the Templar, if you can hit them, I wouldn't say EMPing Templar is a huge sort of goal for a Mech Terran player, but it is certainly available. And then, of course, you know, just the general damage. And never underestimate, as a Protoss player, never underestimate when the Ghost count is up above like 8, 9, 10. And they have cloak. Those things actually really hurt. When you start to get a bunch of ghosts out with +3 weapons, I think they do, what is it, like 13 or 14 damage? Something ridiculous against light units. I can't remember, but they actually can really hurt. And you'd be surprised. A long time ago, I remember a replay cast I did. I think it was the Bosniak versus Avila game from MLG. This is, if you look on the channel, it's way back there. It had like 52 nukes used in that game. But ghosts were killing off void rays and carriers and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't a huge amount of ghosts, like it wasn't 90 ghosts, but there was a lot, like 10 or 15 ghosts on the field, just cloaking up, sitting there, taking out observers, and then killing off everything else. It was really weird to watch. So never underestimate ghosts. Always have a couple of observers and make sure you can deal with them. Step number 5, dropping the SCV count. Once the Terran gets up to around about 4 bases, they'll normally be just exploding with minerals at that point. They will probably start to build up some extra command centers, bringing in extra orbitals, meaning more mules, so that they can kill off some of their SCVs. Of course, normally in a game, for any race, your normal sort of worker count will be sitting around about sort of anywhere between sort of 60 to even anywhere up to 80 sometimes, if people want to go a little bit more greedy with it. As a Mech Terran player starts to pick up their 4th base, heck, even if we're playing on Frost or something like that, we go up to 5, 6 bases. If it gets that late, they will just cut off all the SCVs. Normally people will start to drop down to around about sort of 30 SCVs. You need to have all that gas coming in, so you need to have at least, you know, like, what is it, about 18, I think. I'm not exactly sure. Numbers are really bad. It's really early in the morning. But they will then, you know, drop the SCV count, which means that their army supply count can increase as well. So you got to be careful of that kind of stuff. Keep an eye on that. If you do start to see the SCVs dying, say, all right, they're possibly getting ready for a big max out. Whether they are switching to battle cruisers or something like that, so they can make room with the SCVs, or something else. Number 6, Raven, Cattle Bruiser, and Ghost. This is what most Terran play. Some people, as I said, there's some real interesting diversity with how Mech is played at the extreme late game when you move to your final countdown. But Ravens are used for point defense drones. The point defense drones will knock out Tempest shots. They'll knock out Stalker shots if you're silly enough to build Stalkers at late game. Battle cruisers will Yamato down big targets such as Tempest, such as You know, Immortals, Colossi, again, if you're silly enough to build them late game, Void Rays and all these kinds of things. And not to mention, they just do a lot of damage and they're very tanky. Ghosts come out, as we said before, they EMP, they you know, snipe down smaller targets on the ground, that kind of stuff. You got to be careful of all that stuff. And also, I don't have it on there, but Vikings are also generally out in a relatively high number at the end of, at the sort of end game, post, you know, 40-50 minutes of a game, if you are going that long. And then the final thing for the Terran Mech player when they're playing this style is patience. This applies across through the entire game, but particularly at late game, you have to be very patient. You have to wait for Ravens to have their energy up so that you can point defense drones, so that you can Hunter-Seeker missile, so that you can have your energy on your battle cruisers as well, so that they can Yamato, have your SCVs out repairing, all this kind of stuff. Now, all of these things, when you roll them together, this, I'm sure, like, through all that ranting for what 10 minutes that I've been going over this kind of blueprint, this illustrates why it's actually it's a relatively difficult strategy to execute, which is why we don't see it very often. So that leads us to the point of how do we deal with it. So a lot of as I was saying before, a lot of the time when I see replays, people can sometimes get some really bad tunnel vision and will stick with a very with the same unit, and will try these little cute things with, you know, drops and all sorts of things, which when you do it right, it's all fine and good, because that's the main thing about Protoss dealing with Mech, is that the Protoss player has such great hard counters. Immortals smash through tanks, Immortals smash through Thors, Void Rays when they're not being, I suppose, dealt with by ghosts and Hunter-Seeker missiles and stuff like that, will tear apart a lot of Mech, and it's a key frustration of playing Mech, particularly Void Rays. But sometimes, particularly for newer people playing the game, and also for people just first encountering Mech, you sometimes you take the wrong path, and sometimes will go the wrong way. So we'll talk about how to deal with that in just a second. It's also interesting for anyone who played Brood War who played Protoss in Brood War, to consider that the same way that we back in the day used to deal with Mech, it's kind of similar. I'll sort of illustrate it soon, but it's similar in the way that we dealt with Mech back in the day. In Brood War, for those of you who never played, Terran Mech was actually the common thing in TvP. Doing bio, there was a strategy called the Deep Six. There were some random kind of medic marine, you know, timings and all this kind of stuff. But bio was the thing where you'd say, whoa, step back, buddy. You know, what the hell is going on here? So bio was actually the weird thing back in the day. Mech was the big thing, and of course, as we all know, someone like Flash was just wonderful, an absolute treat to watch when he played Mech. He'd turtle up, he'd sit back, he'd get 3-3 on his upgrades for his tanks and vultures and all these kinds of things, and then just roll forwards, and it would just be a parade, kind of like watching Marine Mine Medevac in TVZ. Just a parade of tanks and vultures moving forwards, being very strategic, with vultures dropping down their spider mines in the ground and covering and slowly leapfrogging forwards. For the Protoss players, you had a few options, a couple of options. You could go to the standard kind of mixture of Zealots running forwards. They in Brood War, again, if you didn't play, Zealots actually had an upgrade called leg. We called it legs. Leg enhancements, I think, was the proper name for it. But basically, Zealots actually had like a faster speed all the time, not a charge, just a much faster speed, a constant faster speed. And what you would do is you would send the Zealots forward, tanking all the siege tank fire as they do now, and then also tanking the spider mines as well. And then your Dragoons would follow. You would have Templar as well to throw down some Psy Storms, and Arbiters would be used for stasis and cloaking, kind of like a mothership. And that was the essential kind of the primary way that you could deal with it. You could also go to carriers as well, but that's sort of a little bit more later game. But interestingly, we'll talk about carriers very soon as well. So let's talk about the Protoss principles. I suppose the 7 principles that I have, I guess, based things on for what we're going to talk about here for the new folks of dealing with Mech. Number 1, Mech isn't very mobile. Tanks have to siege and unsiege. Thors are relatively slow units for, I mean, they're big mech warrior things, right? Hellbats, if they're out, kind of slow. Yeah. Of course, they can switch around if people get transformation servos, which no one ever really does. And they can go Hellions and be a lot faster. Battle cruisers, relatively slow, but they do go as the bird flies, so they can get around a little bit quicker than most ground units. If your opponent's using Widow Mines before they have their alligator clips, they're kind of slow because they have to burrow unburrow. Their shot takes a little while to shoot off, and then so with Mech you can abuse that sort of immobility in a way. I'm not going to say it's a completely immobile kind of strategy, but it's slow. Let's just put it at that. So ways to deal with that. You can take advantage of this in the early game, sort of very early mid as well. You can go Blink Stalkers and take advantage of terrain such as Star Station, such as Yonsu, maybe Yonsu. It's sort of a bit of a smaller map, but you can blink around, take advantage, blink into their main, kill off a factory, blink out. On the other side of the map, blink into the natural or something like that, and kill off some workers there. Blink out, go away, do your macro back at home. All these kinds of things. Multitasking when it comes to Mech can be kind of difficult and frustrating to deal with in the early part of the game. If you have just a few tanks and some Hellbats, maybe a Banshee perhaps, if people do go for Banshees every now and then, which lots of people actually are now. It can be annoying to have to siege, unsiege, move over here, oh god, he's blinked out. Move over here, okay, he's blinked out again. The other opportunities include going for Warp Prisms with Immortals in them. Drop them in, just as we used to do in Wings of Liberty with the Warp Prism battles in PvP. Drop out the Immortals, shoot down some targets, maybe grab a tank. If you can snag a tank, that's always very nice. Drop it out, get some damage done. Very similar to Brood War with a shuttle dropping in a Zealot and a Reaver and killing off a tank every now and then. Similar kind of thing here with Immortals. You can do the same thing with Zealots and Immortals, doing that same kind of stuff. One thing which I don't know about this one too much, I haven't really seen it, I haven't really tried it either, is doing a small, like a combination of Oracle and Phoenix. Early game Mech doesn't have a huge amount of anti-air. They can get turrets out, they can put down a random Widow Mine or two, but getting the Thors out, as we said before, Thors are 300, 200, they're very expensive, and they're very slow. They're very, as we said before, they take a long time to move between bases. You can try and take advantage of that. I don't know about that one. Don't take that, as gospel though, because I'm not too sure about that one. I'll have to have a look at it a little bit later on. Number 2 of our Protoss principles. Mech doesn't have huge amounts of harass. It's not Bio, where you're going to get drops of Marauders and Marines stimming up, shredding mineral lines, and killing off workers straight away. What you will have is Hellions coming in, Hellion drops, Hellbat drops, Widowmine drops, as we said before. That kind of harass, but sorry, Cloak Banshees as well can also come about these days with the change to Cloak research. But it's not as if that stuff is amazingly frightening to deal with. Of course, this is one of the big things that Terrans like to complain about, is that it's really hard to harass. And I'll admit, it's not easy to do, but I think it's much easier with Bio than it is with Hellions. Hellions can be easily blocked out by single force fields, possibly even, just a couple of small units. Cannons easily deal with Widow Mines and Banshees, and I mean, that's pretty much the crux of it. It's not as if someone's going to come across and drop down a Thor and try and do some harassment. Like, they might, but they'd be pretty silly to do that. or like double tank drops on a cliff or something like that. No longer are we in Wings of Liberty where we have maps with cliffs on the edge of the natural or anything like that. So you won't see a huge amount of harassment. Now what you do with that is you can take advantage of that. Expanding very quickly. I personally, when I see that someone's going for mech, like to expand, like to possibly even get a third base really, really quickly. You can also take advantage of going double forge, sometimes even going a triple forge. Ooh, is a little bit risky, but going for a triple forge can be quite interesting as well. If you can crank out upgrades really fast as a Protoss dealing with mech, it will put you in a really nice position. And just, generally think about ways that you can take advantage of the harassment issues that a mech player can face that way. Number 3, gather intel properly. When you're gathering intelligence about mech, you want to know, I think it's three principal things. Where is he? What is the composition? And where is he looking to expand to? Mech likes to, when mech players look to take a base, they make sure that they have enough tanks to secure it, possibly some Hellions or Hellbats or mines or something to make sure that it's secure as well, and then they move to that base and take it. You need to be careful when dealing with that kind of thing, because if you move in, you don't know where everything is, then you can be in a lot of trouble. I'm a big believer in using a lot of observers. I usually get out around about 5. I know a lot of pro players will be saying, "Oh, don't do that. That's silly because you cut down your production from your robot." I like to be able to see what's going on, and I think you can take advantage of mech by knowing exactly what the guy is up to. If you can see the composition, you know how to deal with it. You can adjust to deal with the composition, because as we said, mech does have some variables when it comes to what the composition is made of. Even inside of a standard kind of, let's say it's Tank, Thor, Hellbat, and Raven, you can have adjustments of the levels of the units. You can have a higher Hellbat count, in which case, alright, no Zealots basically. You don't want to go near the Zealots. You want to go a little bit more towards possibly Void Rays and more more Immortals. And then you may see higher, like a higher Raven count quicker, which may indicate that he's put less gas into something else, so there'd be less tanks, so that you can take advantage of that. So keeping an eye on things, I think, is a really important part. Number 4, Colossus and Stalkers are trash. After the 20-minute mark, I never build Stalkers or Colossus when it comes to dealing with mech. It's Stalkers disintegrate to tanks. They take the extra damage from the bonus to armored or whatever from tanks, and then also just get annihilated by siege mode. Colossus have a range of 9 with extended thermal lance. Tanks in siege mode have a range of 13. So those 2 particular units I find relatively useless after the 20-minute mark. As we said before, don't be afraid to use Blink Stalkers at the start to harass your opponent and be very mobile and keep him on his toes. But after the 20-minute mark, no, I wouldn't be doing that. I did speak to Zazinski before I was sort of recording this, and he said, yeah, when I see people build Stalkers after like when it comes to mid and late game, when people build Stalkers, you kind of like, oh, enjoy your wasted resources. So just, I wouldn't even bother. Colossus 300, 200, put that into a Void Ray. Put that into, God, even a Tempest as well. Number 5, which does relate to some things we were talking about earlier. Don't mass one unit type. This is the common thing that I see when people first deal with mech, and it's happened quite a few times when I've played mech versus Protoss as well. People think that common kind of thing that gets echoed in the community, just make Immortals and Zealots. You can't mass Immortals and win versus mech unless the other person. You can't. Let me rephrase that. You can't beat a competent mech player with mass units of one particular type. If you said to me you were going to go mass Zealots, I'll just say, alright, we'll get some Hellbats. easy fixed. If you said you were going to go mass immortals, we'll get some ghosts and then some tanks up and possibly even a couple of Thors just to laugh. If you said you're going to go mass void race, again, ghosts and Thors, their splash damage, the EMP taking down the shields of void race, doesn't really matter. And of course, you know, mass stalkers eventually going to get busted down. Colossi are going to get killed as well. So don't ever mass a particular unit type when dealing with mech. You want to be the true downfall of a skilled mech player, a competent mech player, comes from having to deal with multiple harass, comes from dealing with flanking, proper surrounds with zealots and you know, units coming in from all sides. Good splits as well. Don't forget good splits on Void Rays, because Void Rays clump like something that clumps a lot. I don't know. And also good, like really good tactical decision making. Those are sort of the three key things that really does take apart mech. Is those sorts of particularly harassment ideals. When we're not considering early base, you know, 2-base sort of aggression all-in builds. Let's just keep that in mind. I totally forgot to mention that. We're considering playing a non-1-base or 2-base game. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier, but we're considering playing that, you know, a much more macro-orientated style, where we're going to try and actually deal with Terran a little bit later on. Number 6. Things are quite messy end game. This is remarkably true. People, when you get to end game, you know, 35 minutes plus, 40 minutes plus, things start to get a little bit annoying to deal with when it comes to mech. The mech units, when you move into that BC Ghost, Viking, Raven, Thor mix up based on whatever the person wants to go for. As you said before, EMPs will wreck everything. They take down the shields of Tempest, Archons, Carriers, even a Mothership if you get that out. And then the BCs can go to town with the Yamato. Ravens will ruin Tempests. It sort of goes on. So if you get to late game, it is very difficult to deal with a competent mech player. As you'll see, if you jump onto Dzezinski's stream, if he gets to late game in a versus Protoss, or god, even versus Zerg as well, good luck trying to bust through that unless you have some really good read of what's going on. So this is why the late game composition, which is number 7 here, comes to a place where there's no this is what you do. These are the 3 units you get, and this is how many you get. There's nothing like that. You have to be very adaptable and adjust, because mech can also be very adaptable as well. The key sorts of units which you want to see will generally revolve around Templar for feedbacks. You want to feedback if a mothership is out, you want to feedback that. I know that sounds really weird. Because like no one makes a mothership anymore, but you do want to feedback that if possible, just as a free way to get a huge amount of damage on it. You want to feedback Ravens if they're out, feedback Ghosts if possible, feedback even point defense drones if you can't find another target to feedback on that list, because that's sort of like a priority list, I guess. Is you can feedback point defense drones, and that'll screw them up as well. So Templar are quite handy. Templar can also storm. Sorry, just in case you didn't know. Templar can also throw out a storm every now and then, which on clumped up tanks can do a relatively nice amount of damage, considering it's free. The next kind of unit, Tempest. Tempests deal with battle cruisers really, really well. You just have to get the point defense drones out of the way. You have to make sure they're protected from Vikings. You have to make sure they're protected from Ghosts. All these kinds of things. So you have to be very careful with that kind of stuff. But Tempests will wreck battlecruisers very, very quickly. What do? 85 damage? 95? Something freaking crazy against massive air. Again, a really weird kind of hard counter unit that I don't like. But anyway. Archons and Zealots on the ground. As we said before, you do not want Colossi, you do not want Stalkers. Both of those units are completely useless late game. If Colossi could bang their heads against the battlecruisers, they might be a little bit more useful, but unfortunately they can't. I don't know why. That should be an upgrade. You should also have a lot of gateways back at home. You will lose a lot of units in late game fights with battlecruiser, Ghost, Raven, Viking, Thor, whatever. That's it. It's basically an inevitability, because a good player will be able to EMP Yamato and Hunter Seeker even to smash down Protoss units. So you have to be ready to resupply. 20 gateways would be good. I mean, in a 40-minute game, even if you were playing against Bio, you should probably have like 20 gateways or more. Another good thing that I also do like to throw in is an Oracle. Sounds really weird, but when you think about it, issues with Tempest is that it can shoot farther than it can see. If you throw down a Revelation, you can actually shoot those Vikings before they get into their own range. You can shoot battlecruisers before they can get into Yamato cannon range. So an Oracle, like, I don't see this very often. In fact, rarely, if ever, because I suppose it's rare to ever get to a late game mech TVP. But an Oracle could help, could save you bacon. And one thing, a final thing, which I want to point out, is that carriers are actually very good late game, as long as you're careful with them. Zazinski was saying to me, yeah, I've had people building carriers, and it's actually really difficult to deal with, because point defense drone doesn't stop an interceptor shot. Carriers, if they're micro properly, can sort of wander away from the battle a little bit now that the interceptor leashing was changed. They have a lot of shields. They also have a lot of health. So if you can keep them away from Hunter Seekers, from EMPs, they can actually do quite well. And they do have, I believe, still the highest DPS in the game when it comes to fully upgraded carriers. And from what I have seen in some replays, anything above 222 on mass carriers, you're pretty much gonna you're gonna win unless you screw it up, because carriers do so much damage. They're so well protected. As long as, keep in mind, you have to have Templar on the ground. You have to feed back those battlecruisers and the Ghosts and these kinds of things. But with a lot of carriers, with good upgrades, you will be able to smash through a Terran player later on. Now, what we will do, just quickly, is I just wanted to have a quick look at this little game that I've got here from Zazinski. This is a 30, well, this actually goes for about an hour and 20 minutes. This is effectively what we have when we come to Supreme late game in a mech TVP. Is you move into someone, this is Cole's Kai Fire. I actually remember who that player is, but this is here over on the EU server in the Masters ranks, by the way. All these replays that I'll be having a quick look at will be posted in the description, so you can have a look for them there. But what we do have here is the late game compositions. Ravens, lots of Vikings, lots of Ghosts on the ground, a couple of Thors in there, and some leftover tanks are here for Zazinski. So he's got this late game composition. What he's dealing with is what is effectively one of the sort of the larger kind of compositions of Tempests and carriers that you'll ever see. But this is what you do kind of want to look like late game. Of course, he is missing... Oh, sorry, there they are. There are the Templar. I was going to say, where are the Templar? I'm sure he had them in this replay. But you get some Templar out for feedbacks, and then you should be all good. But what he does have is a high DPS of a couple of carriers, the massive long-range power of the Tempest as well. As you can see, the point defense drone chewing up some of those shots, which is really annoying. But this is sort of late game, something similar to what you want to be looking at. And we will see, is there a storm? Oh, not too bad. Goes for a storm, but either way, what you want to be aiming for are the feedbacks on those Ravens if possible, because you will kill them off. Obviously, they do have 200 energy as a max, and only 140 health, so you will kill them off if you get a feedback on a high energy Raven. But this is what we're talking about here. Lots of extra orbital commands made. SCV count currently sitting at 26. and you know, lots of production back at home. We've got 8 starports available for Dzerzhinsky for his production. For some reason, there's a couple of Thors here. We even have nukes flying up in the sky. So this is like, as you move into really late game, what things start to look like. And in this particular game, I'm not going to commentate anything, guys, but in this particular game, Kai Fire went up to his 3rd base relatively quickly, if I remember correctly, and then started to move into air once he had a really nice amount of economy bringing things in. So he started to move into Sky Toss here, and eventually, as we sort of fast forwarded a little bit, things get a little bit difficult to deal with for Dzerzhinsky because he has to deal with the long-range power of those Tempests, the carriers there with their DPS as well. Just by the way, guys, carriers wreck Vikings when there's enough, when there's sort of past the critical mass of carriers of around about sort of 6-7, they will smash through Vikings. It's actually quite hilarious to watch. And of course, with the backup of the Tempest, that also means that they can do really well there as well. But this game does get drawn out quite a lot. Like, I mean, there's a great wall of cannons through the middle of the map. It's kind of funny to watch. But slowly but surely, this is that patience thing I was talking about for a Terran player, with Dzerzhinsky eventually burning down some of this stuff here. We can see the Kai Fire wants to go across the map and get some serious damage done, and he does, taking out some of these bases. But the Ravens will come in. You can see that the point defense drone does so much work against these Tempests, and Kai Fire will have to recall back home, and Dzerzhinsky shoots his own Viking as a sign of protest there. But this is, as I was saying, this is what things start to look like late game. Some people will get a few more carriers and try and change things up a little bit, but this is what things will generally look like, I suppose, is the end of it. If anyone's wondering why did he photon overcharge that, he was just using up the last of the energy. Unfortunately, you don't keep the energy when you switch over to a mothership. But this is actually one of the few games where you get to see someone getting a mothership here, and it really helps out. It provides you with that little bit of cloak, which isn't, you know, it's not great considering that there are already Ravens out, but 23 Ravens, just keep in mind. But it also gives you a little bit of firepower. The mothership, you know, she's got a nice amount of damage that she can put out too. So this is kind of what it looks like when you do go for when you go into that late game where you have that, you know, thing, number 7. When you're dealing with number 6, you need to go for number 7. Make sure you have the correct composition and that you adjust accordingly. Always very important to make sure you adjust to that kind of thing. And just before, where is the oh, actually, we'll forget those replays. But I'll post 3 replays in the description here. Keep in mind, guys, this is not aimed at Masters and Grandmasters to be able to, you know, figure out how to make, because you guys already know how to do it. This is aimed a little bit more for people who are lower down in the leagues there and want to have a basic idea of how to deal with Mech. Of course, if you want to see, you know, Apollo and Nathanius might know a little bit more than I do, because they play Terran a bit more competently. But I mean, these kinds of principles that I've listed here are the main sort of things that you want to be thinking about when you are playing against Mech. Well, that'll be it for this. If you guys enjoyed this kind of, I guess, educational content, let me know. Post in the comments. Make sure you share and subscribe as well. Hit that subscribe button so that I know you guys love the content. And yeah, if you do like it, let me know, and I'll see if I can post some more. I can do some of the other races as well, or do some more quirky sort of strategy stuff. But thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time. Here, as you can see, 47 damage to bio units, and then the 34 damage against other standard targets. His storms have also been wonderful, just spreading them out across the battlefield, doing really nicely there. And for minigun, he's been sticking with a much more